Can a driver unlock a car's true potential without the team even anticipating it? How is it possible that Oscar Piastri, without technical improvements, has humiliated the favorites and taken pole in Qatar? Are we at the beginning of a change of hierarchies within McLaren? The arrival of the 2025 Qatar Grand Prix did not generate high expectations in the McLaren garage. The Lusail track, known for its demanding first sector, high-speed corners and abrasive asphalt, posed a technical challenge that most teams viewed as an opportunity to consolidate results, not take risks. McLaren, in particular, opted for a conservative strategy. With no new parts or visible innovations in the MCL39, the focus was clear: optimize what was already known and secure solid points that would allow Lando Norris to continue leading the Drivers' Championship. The internal environment at McLaren reflected that approach. Andrea Stella, team director, had stated that the priority of the weekend was to minimize errors and maintain the advantage in constructors and drivers without exposing the car to risky configurations. Everything pointed to a weekend of containment, not prominence. In that context, the driver who should shine was Lando Norris, who had not only shown consistency in the first rounds of the calendar, but was also the most reliable in qualifying sessions. The team simulations placed him with a clear advantage over his Australian teammate, especially in low-grip conditions such as those expected in Qatar. However, from the first minutes of the only practice available, as it was a sprint weekend, something began to catch our attention. Oscar Piastri, normally slow in the process of adapting to the ideal setup, was aggressive but precise, especially in the short braking zones. With each lap he accumulated information, adjusted lines and communicated to his race engineer, Tom Stallard, specific details that helped adjust tire pressures and suspension parameters. This level of operational clarity had not been common in his last few weekends, where he had often been mired in inconsistencies in both pace and communication. What initially seemed like a simply fluid session escalated into something more serious when in Q2 of the sprint shootout, Piastri set a time that placed him ahead of not only Norris, but also Max Verstappen. The astonishment within the team was immediate. Engineers reviewed data to confirm whether there had been measurement errors. The telemetry validated what everyone saw. Oscar was squeezing the MCL39 with a precision that not even the simulator had anticipated. The pole position in the sprint qualifying was not just a magical lap. It was the result of a session in which Piastri was technically perfect. The car had no updates. The engine was the same. The track conditions were identical for everyone. And yet, the Australian achieved a tactical and technical execution that left his rivals and his own team without a response. To understand the degree of surprise that Oscar Piastri caused within McLaren during the Qatar Grand Prix weekend, it is necessary to delve into the technical and logistical approach that the British team had planned for this event. Since before the start of the season, Lusail was not listed as a track where the MCL39 would have a natural advantage. The simulations carried out in Woking indicated that the track would favor cars with greater stability in medium-slow corners and traction in cornering exits, characteristics that, although McLaren had worked through aerodynamic development after 2024, it had not yet mastered with full authority. Additionally, the weekend conditions didn't leave much room for experimentation. The sprint format reduced track time to a single practice before moving directly to qualifying. This detail forced all teams to rely on simulator predictions and historical data, something that usually benefits drivers with the ability to adapt quickly and intuitive reading of the car. In theory, that profile was a better fit for Lando Norris, who has historically been the team's most effective driver at maximizing short sessions. In fact, McLaren had decided not to introduce any new package of improvements or engines, opting to maintain the same technical set used in Japan and Australia, which reinforced the expectation of stability, not innovation or big surprises. The technical structure of the MCL39 was designed to exploit a balance in high-speed corners and short braking, with a particular emphasis on achieving thermal efficiency in the front tires, without compromising the traction of the rear axle. This, which on paper was supposed to benefit Norris, ended up revealing a gray area in the car's standard configuration. Piastri, from the first lap on the track, began to point out that the car responded better with certain adjustments in braking distribution and a closer differential in high lateral load corners. These changes were suggested live to the technical team, who began implementing their recommendations with some skepticism. Engineers, reviewing the telemetry, found an unexpected pattern. Piastri had managed to generate uniform temperature in his tires, something that had been one of his main weaknesses in previous classifications. In particular, it managed to warm up the front axle without compromising the integrity of the rear, which allowed it to attack the first part of the Lusail circuit more aggressively without losing grip when exiting the corners. It was a phenomenon that, according to internal data, had not been replicated in previous simulator training. In fact, the suspension and downforce setup he had chosen for the sprint was virtually identical to the one used in the Australian GP, where his performance had been barely correct. What changed then? The result was so unexpected that it even generated confusion on the McLaren wall. The team had not prepared any race scenario that would put Piastri on pole. There was no containment plan against Verstappen behind him, nor an ideal race pace map adapted to the Australian strategy. They had put all the weekend's resources into managing Norris' championship, without foreseeing that the threat to the status quo would come from their own pit. And that revelation, more than any piece of information, is what really destabilized the team. Because it was not about luck, nor a lucky turn. It was the product of a driver who, without improvements, without expectations, and without total internal support, taught his own team something that they did not know about his car. Until arriving in Qatar, the narrative surrounding Oscar Piastri was very different from the one that today positions him as one of the unexpected protagonists of the championship. During the middle stretch of the 2025 season, his performance had entered a downward spiral marked by small but cumulative errors. These were not accidents or catastrophic abandonments, but a progressive loss of confidence that manifested itself in weak classifications, lack of pace in changing conditions, and an over-reliance on adjustments suggested by the technical team. Internally, McLaren had begun to see in him a stagnant driver, still talented but too conditioned by the technical demands of the MCL39, a car that required a degree of surgical precision to be competitive. But then Qatar arrived, and with it an unexpected turning point. Since Friday's first lap, something changed in Piastri's body language. The way he took corners, how he spoke on the radio, how he interacted in the box. It was as if everything that had been a limitation in the previous weeks had suddenly aligned itself. There were no new parts. There was no additional simulator time. There were no changes to the technical team. What there was a total connection between the driver, the car, and the track. And that synergy, so difficult to describe and even more difficult to predict, manifested itself in lap times that were impossible to ignore. Piastri wasn't just fast. It was clinically accurate. Each braking point was millimetric, each acceleration at the right moment, each direction correction imperceptible. Where others lifted, he pushed. Where the car tended to understeer, he balanced it with subtle adjustments to the differential. The execution was impeccable. And the most amazing thing is that it was not the product of an isolated magical lap, but the culmination of a progression throughout the weekend. His performance grew with each run, he didn't falter under pressure, and when SQ3 came around, he left nothing on the table. This rebirth, however, goes beyond the technical level. The key was his emotional transformation. Piastri found something in Qatar that he had been missing all year: pure confidence. Not the confidence that is declared in an interview, but the one that is felt in the core when you know that you can get the most out of the car without thinking about it. That feeling of not driving by reaction, but by anticipation. And it is precisely that kind of confidence that separates good pilots from those who mark an era. From the point of view of the Drivers' Championship, Piastri's promotion reconfigures the pressure dynamics. Until this moment, Lando Norris comfortably occupied the role of undisputed leader in the table, benefiting from overwhelming consistency in the first 3 rounds of the year. His performance had placed him as the man to beat, even above established figures such as Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, or George Russell. But the emergence of Piastri, who has not only recovered ground but has shown a performance ceiling higher than expected, introduces a new factor into the equation: the possibility that McLaren does not have just one contender for the title, but 2. Furthermore, this resurgence of Piastri could have implications on the driver market and on the external perception of McLaren as a structure. From the paddock, other teams and sponsors not only observe the results, but also the trends. A rising Piastri, young, charismatic, and technically solid, can become a sought-after figure for future lineups, especially if the team fails to retain him in a position of competitive equality. Likewise, media pressure on McLaren will increase, not only because of its leadership position, but because of the expectations that are now placed on both cars and not just one. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.